Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Wonderful technical difficulties, but we are so excited for everyone that's been able to join us today for our first part of our three-part series of our virtual poster workshop. As some key logistic items, if you are having any technical difficulties, as you can see we have all been having, feel free to call in, and this will be the call-in number, or you can also use the chat function on your lower right-hand side in order to contact the host, which is me, and I will try to troubleshoot all of those problems for you. So again, so sorry about all these technical issues. And we are encouraging that this is a really interactive webinar, so please feel free to submit questions through the chat or Q&A function, and Ben and Austin will be able to field those at the end of the presentation. And so with that, I will go ahead and kick this off to Ben and Austin from Sanford Research to go ahead and get us started.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ashley, for the opportunity to present, and everybody, thanks for joining us today. I hope that everyone can hear me just fine. We've been having some issues on our side too with the internet in the building. So the good news is we've intentionally made this presentation short enough that there'll be extra time at the end for questions. And so I'm really hopeful that we'll be able to kind of move through it and accommodate everyone. So first off, I think we'll just start off with some introductions. So my name is Benjamin Ford. I work at Sanford Research, which is the research arm of a hospital system based in the Dakotas. And I work closely with the CORDS Registry, which is our rare disease registry program that we put together. My background is in basic science research, and so I'm cell and molecular biology. I've spent about the better part of a decade working in a laboratory, and poster presentations are something that I got very familiar with doing throughout the course of time. And so I'm really excited to kind of share some of the insights over this three-series webinar series with you all. And hopefully you'll be able to come away with the understanding that you need to not only create a poster, but to successfully share that poster and present it at conferences to really help share your story with not only scientists, but everyone else in the community as well. So Austin, do you want to maybe introduce yourself too?
Hey, Ben, it looks like Austin is having trouble with some tech as well. I'm going to go ahead and try getting him in, but do you want to go ahead and maybe do an intro for him while I try getting him connected in?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, so I work closely with Austin. He works with the CORDS Registry as well. Austin's background is in biomedical engineering. He's got a master's degree, and then he has a bachelor's degrees in both chemistry and physics. And so he brings a strong science background as well. It's kind of an interesting situation where in research and in science, communication is somewhat standardized across the board, where we all read each other's publications and each other's papers that our labs put out. But at big conferences, these poster sessions are kind of a quick snapshot or a way to tell the story of a project. And so this is kind of what we're trying to hopefully do is demystify some of the language of the researcher here and give you the tools that you need to put together a successful poster presentation for scientific meetings as well. I'm going to try to advance the slide here to the first one just to get us kicked off. There's just a little background in both of us. So what are posters and why are they important? We've kind of delved into this a little bit. They're the preferred kind of communication tool that's used at conferences to share up-to-date information on projects that may be ongoing, that haven't reached their culmination yet, to give a sneak peek at maybe what future publications might be coming out. But more and more, I'm seeing at scientific conferences, I'm learning that it's becoming more commonplace to have areas where there's maybe a patient advocacy pavilion, or an area where patients can present posters on their communities. Advocacy organizations can tell a story. And so it's a good format for that kind of commingling. I always use this example it's not a perfect analogy, but when looking at advocacy and science and research into a given disease, there's kind of those two different groups of people, the scientists and then the patients and the advocates. And they're kind of like the situation where you have at a 7th grade dance, where you've got the boys on one side and the girls on the other side of the gym, and everybody really wants to talk to each other, but nobody really knows how to take that first step and do it. And this is really one tool that I see as a great way for both parties to kind of bridge that gap and meet at center court, so to speak. So a few examples of how posters are used to tell just a single story. We talk about laboratory projects that are used to test a hypothesis. For advocates, a successful fundraising campaign could be highlighted in a poster. You could talk about the development of any sort of a toolkit or any educational pieces that you've put together for your community to share with clinicians. That's certainly a great way to interact with them as well. And then, results of any data, this is probably my favorite, any data that you've collected through the course of executing on a rare disease registry. If you've been collecting data from your community, a poster is a great way to succinctly pull that all together and tell the story. Here are some things you may not know about our community, and you can demonstrate that through the use of a poster really easily. Understanding posters in general gives you a little bit more of a platform to tell your story and your community's story to researchers and anyone else at the conference, clinicians, genetic counselors, and so on.
Yeah, Ben, can I jump in here real?
Yeah, Austin, thanks for joining.
Yes, I'm here now. Sorry, guys. I love the kind of an analogy that you use about the 7th grade dance. And I think it's important for all the patient advocates out there to know that a lot of researchers are actually probably just as intimidated by you as you are by them. So bridging that connection and really creating a communication pathway between the patients and the researchers is absolutely vital. There's one anecdotal story that we have here at Stanford Research that I think is great to tell, and it involves the Alagille Syndrome Alliance and one of our researchers who studies Alagille syndrome. They didn't really know each other beforehand, and we brought them to meet one another. I mean, you could just see sparks flying in the air. It was a great connection, and now they're helping that researcher drive or guide the research, and now he has a real commitment to the researcher. So when he's looking at those cells, he's no longer seeing cells and the organelles. He's seeing a piece of a patient, and it's really reinvigorated his research. So just wanted to give you guys that kind of story. It's really important to bridge these connections and use poster sessions for that.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's a great story that just kind of showcases the importance for everyone talking to each other and meeting at center court as often as possible. So, the other thing that I was going to touch on too is that the poster sessions themselves are kind of this separate area of a conference. If you've never been to one of these big scientific conferences or symposiums before, there's usually a whole bunch of talks that are going on throughout the day on various things. And then throughout the day, there are peppered into the schedule different poster session times where presenters are asked to go stand next to their poster, and you can walk through and just walk up to anybody and ask them to tell you their story. And they are great places for networking. So you could imagine being at a large conference where there's several thousand people there, and having the opportunity to tell your story, to share research results from your registry or from your researchers that you've worked with. You could share that information with other scientists. You could share that information with industry. You could meet other patient advocacy organizations or nonprofits that will help you in your space. So determining your target audience is really kind of a big part of how you're going to present that poster. And we'll get into that in the future webinars. Another thing to think about too is that, what are your goals for presenting that poster at that particular conference? Do you want to meet other advocates in your space? Or do you want to connect with researchers that might not necessarily be focused on your condition, but may be interested because they're focused on a pathway that may be implicated in that? And that's maybe something that's important for us to kind of go through here too, is that as basic scientists and as researchers, we seek to understand how certain pathways and how certain molecules or proteins or whatever they are interact with each other within a cell. And when we're focused in, really dialed in that far, it's easy to kind of get abstract and lose the focus on what the condition is, what's going on in the whole person. And so a person may be focused, or a researcher may be focused on one pathway in particular, and they may try to focus their efforts into one disease, but that pathway could have implications in a bunch of different things. And if you're able to articulate that we have problems in pathway X, that researcher may come along and say, hey, I studied that. Tell me a little bit about what's going on there, because things that they learn may be able to inform researchers in your community as well. So it's good to try to cast a wide net and be broad with your messaging. Because different audiences require different messages. So if you're talking to other advocates or you're talking to industry, you'll tell a story separately from what I just described. You won't go into so much of the detail there. Family meetups are great for educating the community. We've heard lots of stories about how family meetups will incorporate a lot of clinicians and bring them in as a way to educate them on research and bring them up to speed on how things have changed in the community over time, how the understanding of the condition has changed over time. And so, being able to present your data or your story in those formats is important as well. So what does this poster process look like? And this can deviate a little bit from what's presented here on the slide, but in general, this is kind of the format that you'll see. Most conferences or meetings will have what's called a call for abstracts ahead of the event. So before you can even register, a lot of times, they will ask for abstracts to be submitted. And an abstract is just a really brief description of what you're going to try to say in the poster. And you'll submit the abstract. They'll review that, and ahead of time, they'll let you know that you've been selected to present a poster. And so I put a note in here that many times they're posted up front because guidelines for presenting are specific to each conference. And so there are some standard things across the board, but dimensions of your poster might change. The expectations for when to stand next to your poster might change. Set up and take down are obviously some big things to know. Some conferences want you to stand by your poster a lot more than others. The beauty of having a poster is that if it's done right, if you're not standing next to it, someone can walk up and get a good idea of what you're trying to say with it. And they'll be able to write down your name, and they'll be able to contact you afterwards if they have any questions. So, that's a big thing. So once you've been selected and your abstract is good to go, you're going to make your poster, and then you're going to go to the conference and present your poster. And those will be the topics of the next 2 workshops that will be coming up in April and in May. So stay tuned for those, and be sure to check back in with us. So what does the anatomy of a poster look like? So this is a poster that I did way back in the day, a few years ago at a conference called Experimental Biology. So this was a really big meeting that was, at 10,000 people or so from all different backgrounds in biology and chemistry. There were hundreds of people that kind of walked by this poster, and you can imagine kind of having to walk through this story kind of over and over and over again. But the things that are going to be the same on most posters, no matter what the conference is, you're going to have a title at the top that's going to be a succinct description of your project, the authors and the affiliation. So who are you, and what's your group, or who are you from? The abstract, kind of a nice thing about writing the abstract, it becomes the first section of your poster. Any methods that you went through, this may or may not be applicable. If you're doing more of an overview of an enrollment campaign or a fundraising campaign, or you're talking about something much more specific to the activity in your advocacy organization, there might not be a whole lot of methods or materials to talk about. But It's kind of just what did we do to do this project? And then the bulk of this poster is going to be the results. So you can see here it takes up the bottom of the first column, all of the second, and the majority of the third column. This is really just the meat and potatoes of your story. What do you see? What came out of what you did? Finally, you end up with your conclusions. What did we take away from the project? And then your acknowledgments. It's always good to acknowledge sources of funding. If you receive payment from certain foundations or the government, it's always good to give them a nod and acknowledge them in the poster. And then, of course, anytime you work with another group or another person and you're presenting that work, you always want to make sure to go out of your way to acknowledge them and point out what parts of the project they helped with.
Great point, Ben. Can I jump in?
Yeah.
I think it would be good to recognize too. We realize not all of you are going to be conducting experiments necessarily, but don't forget about qualitative research too. I mean, you could create your own surveys and survey your population, and just get some stats on symptoms, treatments, or quality of life to present on your poster. Those would be good kind of measures that researchers could actually take a look at and digest and maybe relate back to the science. So it doesn't have to be a specific scientific project per se. Of course, graphs and pie charts and things like that are really good, eye-catching for researchers to look at. So if you can incorporate some of those would be helpful too.
Yeah, I agree with you, Austin. I think in a lot of cases, people are using posters to communicate not only the people in their community, but the clinicians and the people who take care of them in the clinic. And using any sort of clinical rating scales or things that are more qualitative, the poster is a great way to display all of that data succinctly. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about this abstract, because this might be something that you're not all super familiar with. The abstract is a really, really high-level overview of your story. Think about the parts of your poster that we just kind of went over. You just kind of work through the story in that way. It should be usually just a few paragraphs. Your background information, what did you set out to do? How did it all turn out? Those are the types of things you want to give out. Remember, people who are hosting these conferences are going to be receiving abstracts from a lot of people. And if it's too long, then they'll kind of toss it aside. And a lot of times they'll have a word limit associated with it. And it's always a good idea to try to adhere to that. I've had a few occasions myself when submitting an abstract where I saw it was a 500 word limit, and I had an abstract that was like 750 words, and I was like, I'll just copy and paste it in there and send it in. It's close enough. And their website actually just cuts you off at 500 words. And so, the back half of my abstract just got deleted. And so I wound up having to go back and rewrite it anyway. So it's a good idea to pay attention to those limits when writing an abstract. Another thing that is a good reason to participate in this poster process is that a lot of times on the conference website, once abstracts have been selected, they'll publish those and put them out there kind of as the proceedings of that meeting. And those will kind of live out there on the internet. And so these are good ways for you to get your message out and keep it out so that folks can find you and learn more about what you're doing. But yeah, like I said before, once you have your abstract written, submitted, and accepted, that then becomes the first section of your poster. So part of your work is already done. How to write an abstract. Focus on the guidelines. Like I said before, the length of the abstract is a big thing, but some will have a preferred format. You'll find this at a lot of clinical conferences where there are a lot of physicians and genetic counselors and students there, where they want the abstract broken down into what was the objective, what were the materials you used, what were the results, give an analysis, and end with a conclusion. And they actually want that abstract broken up into those separate little pieces. So it's not always just a fluid paragraph or well-written, succinct message. Sometimes they do have these very rigid guidelines that they want you to follow. So first look at that and pay attention to it. But regardless of that, make sure that you're being succinct. It's really easy, especially when you're trying you're passionate about getting your message out there, to go on and try to tell the whole story. There's kind of an art to picking out what are the most important key pieces to this story and only kind of sharing those. Remember, the abstract is just to kind of give a taste. These abstracts will get published in the handbook that gets handed out at the conference, and attendees will have a chance to read through them all. And you want to give them just enough information so that they say, ooh, I'm going to stop by that poster when I have a chance. You kind of want to get them there. You'll have the whole rest of your poster to be able to tell them your full story and relay that passion that you have for your message. So let's think about the reader. Consider a situation where you've only got about a minute to tell your whole story. How would you write it down to share that with them? It's kind of like the concept of an elevator speech, where you get on an elevator with a perfect stranger, they turn to you and say, what do you do? And you've got until floor 6 to tell them about what you spend your time on. You're going to want to hit the high points. What is the most important information? Give them the details that are going to leave them with the highest impact. What's the most memorable elements of your story? And remember those elements of the poster, because that can kind of help you break the story down into what really needs to get conveyed. And in the end, if your abstract is selected, those are the things you're going to be building upon when you create your poster. So here we're coming up to one of your first opportunities to create a poster. We're certainly doing this workshop webinar series in conjunction with Global Genes to help spread the word. And so you are certainly invited and encouraged to take the things that we talk about in this webinar and in the future webinars and apply them to a real life scientific conference. So the Rare Drug Development Symposium is coming up on Friday, June 7th in Philly. And that is going to be in conjunction with Global Genes and the UPenn Orphan Disease Center. It's going to be a great symposium. There'll be scientists there, there'll be industry, there'll be patient advocates. And so this is a good forum to kind of test the waters if you've never done this before. And I'll show you here just kind of what their call for abstracts looks like. This is just a snip from their website. There's some guidelines that you see on how to submit, when the event is, what's the theme of the conference. So keep that in mind as you're looking to write up your abstract. Then in the middle here, in the center of this red box, you got to submit by March 1st. Or excuse me, it opens on March 1st, but you have to have them submitted by April 5th. So the timing of this webinar was intentionally put out there so that you could ask questions, you could get your head kind of wrapped around what type of story am I trying to tell, what would I like to present, and still have time to submit it for this meeting. And Global Genes will review the abstracts, pick out the selected abstracts, and notify everyone by April 19th. And you'll notice that the poster workshops are outlined here. The second one of these poster workshops is on April 24th. So you'll have just found out whether your abstract is accepted or not, and then we'll launch into how to make a poster on April 24th. And then once that's wrapped up, you'll get a few weeks to put that together. And May 23rd, we'll come back with how to present your poster, and that's really the kind of the theatrics behind it. How do you take the poster that you've created and walk someone through it so that they leave feeling the passion and the interest that you have for your message. It's good to point out here in the bottom that there are those guidelines I was talking about earlier. Poster displays are 3 feet high by 4 feet wide. The boards will be provided, and all of the information that you're going to need about the poster session itself is displayed there on the bottom. And then the back half is talking about presenter responsibility. So these are the things that you need to pay attention to when considering whether or not to apply. There's some scheduling stuff here. Networking breaks are great times to kind of go hang out near your poster. People will kind of trickle by and take a look at what you've got there. And then poster breakdown it looks like it's at 3:30 that day, just to set up and take down. Something that's kind of cool that we've been doing here for this particular conference, if you submit a poster and you present it there, you'll be part of a contest, and so we'll have poster judges that'll kind of go around through the poster session, ask each person to go through their story, and then they'll be kind of judged as a competition, who did the best. And the top 3 winners will be invited to present those very posters at the Global Genes Rare Advocacy Summit. That'll be in San Diego in the fall. So it's a really cool opportunity, not just to present your poster for the first time here, but you could potentially win free registration to the much larger Global Genes Advocacy Summit, and to tell your story there, give you a great platform to get your message out. So that's about the end of it. Again, see you on April 24th for part 2 of this series. And like I said at the very beginning, we built this out to be short enough that we'd allow for ample time for questions. So if anybody has any questions at all, at this time, Austin and I would be happy to answer them, and hopefully get you set on track so that you could submit your abstracts by April 5th.
Great. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Austin. We did have a question that came in. The question is, does the data presented need to be unpublished?
That's a great question. So the data most times is actually, well, I shouldn't say that. No, it doesn't need to be unpublished. A lot of times people will present a poster on a completed story that's already been published in scientific peer-reviewed journals. But a lot of times the use of a poster is to tell an unpublished story, to tell kind of the intermediate workings of a project. So you can imagine trying to set out on creating a new therapy. And along that way, you're going to test the therapy in cells, and you're going to test the therapy in animals. Maybe you show the cell data, and while you're presenting your poster, you say, and we're currently testing this in animals. And so it's just enough to kind of talk about what you're working on and give the listener kind of the impression of where you'd like to take the project.
I'll add a little bit more to that, Ben. Yeah, I think presenting your posters is a great opportunity just for brainstorming, at least in the scientific research side of things. A lot of researchers and scientists get input from other like-minded individuals. This might be a different setting and your story might be a little bit different, but I think you can come out with both parties learning a lot from each other.
Great, thank you. We have another question that came in. Do you have suggested search terms in order to search online for additional examples of abstracts or posters?
Sure. Like I said, a lot of the conferences will publish their accepted abstracts on their websites. So if you want to look at larger conferences, you can think of like the National Society for Genetic Counselors, or ACMG, American Society of Molecular Geneticists. Then there's the American Thoracic Society, or like I said, experimental biology is where I presented the poster at earlier. There's all sorts of really huge scientific conferences that should have abstracts, at least accepted abstracts from previous years out there that you can kind of search through. One of the things that we're hoping to do with the next webinar, when we talk about building out a poster, is to give examples of what does a successful poster look like, and what does an unsuccessful poster look like. And there are tons of websites out there that will give you a poster template to kind of go off of, where you can plug and play. And some of those are better than others. And so that's one of the things that we'll talk about in part 2 of the series. I hope that answered that question.
Great. We have another question. The question is, what is the best way to network during poster presentations? Seeing as how you talked about networking in the beginning of this presentation, what would be some key tactics that maybe advocates who are presenting for the first time can do during networking?
Yeah, absolutely. So poster presentations are typically kind of, like I said earlier, coincide with some of the breaks. And so there'll usually be some refreshments served, and it's a good, everybody's kind of relaxed. And so poster presenting is very passive. You kind of stand by your poster and people come by, in groups or one by one. And I think one of the most effective ways to network is not only tell your story, but ask each person what they work on too. And really kind of start that open dialogue. They may or may not work on anything that has anything to do with what you're talking about, but it's great to to engage people. If you're an advocate presenting at a scientific conference, I think it's as a networking tool, good to ask them, where are they from, what university or hospital system are they affiliated with, get a business card, and kind of build up a stream of contacts. So, oh, do you know so and so at UCSD, for example? Then you can kind of build out these conversations. Much like the advocacy space and the rare disease community, the rare disease research space is also a very small world. And the longer that you spend looking at certain conditions or going to similar meetings, the more and more you see the same people and come to know them. And so those relationships are good to build from that perspective. So Austin, maybe you could, if you have any ideas too, what's the best way to network at a poster session?
Yeah, thanks. I was going to echo those ideas about a business card. I think just because you're an advocate doesn't mean you can't bring your own business card with just your contact information, and don't be afraid to kind of ask for things you need. Are there grant mechanisms out there that you can apply for? Just really get to know the individual as much as you can, because you'll be surprised. That individual might not have a direct impact on the results that you're looking for, but maybe they know somebody down the road. So one thing I think you can start by is just saying a simple hello when people are, like Ben said, it's a passive thing when people come to view your posters. So just make sure you're engaging people and making good eye contact, a strong handshake, things like that will pull people in.
Yeah, and this is all stuff that we're going to cover in the third installment of this series. We'll be bringing on Katie Jensen, formerly from the Lamb Foundation, to co-present on that. She has been in the patient advocacy space for a number of years, and I've seen her present posters at a number of conferences, and she's done an excellent job in all of those cases. And so be sure to tune back in when talking about networking and talking about making connections at poster sessions, because we'll have a resident expert in-house to kind of help go through the ins and outs of that.
Great. Just thinking about time, I have a couple more questions. Another question is, who typically reviews abstract submissions? Obviously, I know, in this regard, because we're obviously sharing that we'll be accepting abstracts for Global Genes, but in typical, I think when anyone's applying for poster presentations, what type of professionals typically review the abstracts?
Yeah, so each meeting is going to have an organizing committee and a group that's going to review the abstracts. At scientific conferences, there'll be scientists or leaders in that field. A lot of times there'll be breakdowns in what section you're sending your abstract to. So are you sending it to translational medicine, or are you sending it to biochemistry, or so on and so forth? Like I said, a lot of big conferences, especially clinical conferences, will have patient advocate sections, advocacy pavilions, or whatever they're called for that specific thing. And so the specific groups will have subject matter experts that will review them. And if it's not made publicly available on the website, it never hurts to email them with questions and just ask, who eventually approves or reviews these abstract submissions.
Great, that's good to know. Also good to know from the planning side too. One last question, and then we'll close up our webinar. But is kind of talking about abstract and thinking of the review committee and the type of conference, is it worth tailoring the abstract towards the audience of the conference in terms of if it's for example for ours, because we are an advocacy organization, is it better to kind of tailor it a little bit more to like the organization's focus or the conference's focus?
Yes. In a word, yes. Think of abstract submissions almost like resume submissions. If you're hitting the job market and you're going to apply for a bunch of different jobs, you're not going to, typically not going to be encouraged to send the exact same resume out to every single place unless you're really sending it out to a bunch of people. Each application should have its own considerations, and you want to tailor that message to the audience that's going to be there. And so if you're going to go tell your story at the National Society for Genetic Counselors, you may want to talk about the genetics behind your condition, or maybe some of the panels that are gene panels that it's included on, or maybe you're trying to advocate to get it included on gene panels or part of newborn screening or something. You'll tailor that sort of a message to it. Whereas if you're going to a much more basic science conference, instead of talking about gene panels, you're going to talk more about the basic genetics behind it. How is it inherited? Is it de novo? Those sorts of genetic things are going to play. So yes, I think you're always encouraged to try to submit abstracts that are tailored to each specific conference's call for abstracts.
And I have a comment on that. It kind of echoes what you're saying, Ben, but I also want to hark back to the audience of UPenn and ODC's Rare Drug Development Symposium. It's a pretty diverse group of people. So, I mean, I think the challenge that we'll have guiding you in this is, how to compose a diverse enough poster to capture the attention of, a large number of different audience members. So, could you talk? I know that you've been to this event in the past. Could you talk about maybe the composition of researchers, physicians, clinicians, advocates, academics, and that type of thing that you've seen at this conference?
Yeah, so I was there last year, and Ashley can probably weigh in too on kind of what the mix is, but it is a good blend of scientists, certainly from UPenn, but then also advocates. It always kind of coincides with the $1 Million Bike Ride at the University of Pennsylvania, big fundraising event, and so there are a lot of patients and caregivers there as well. Clinicians attend. And so if this is the first time that you're going to submit an abstract, I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. It kind of gives you an opportunity to just tell your story in a one-size-fits-all sort of situation. And different people will ask you different questions about your poster. And I think it presents a great opportunity.
Great, thank you, Ben. Thank you, Austin. And just to echo Ben's sentiments, yes, both of our events, both our symposium and our summit, are attended by a variety of different individuals that represent the rare disease community, from advocates to researchers to academics. So I think, and to again echo your response, Ben, we do have a wide variety of individuals that come. So I think there's always room to ask new questions depending on your audience, and you'll get a different type of group coming to your posters all the time, I think, at our conferences. So, well, those are all the questions we have for this webinar. And so I wanted to just thank Ben and Austin for joining us, and apologies to all of our attendees for our technical issues this morning. Typical WebEx, if any of you have ever used it. And again, this webinar is being recorded and will be made available on our website. And I would really encourage all of you to join us for our part 2 of this series. And Ben will also be joining us for that, as well as Mohsen Bose, who is a Montclair University professor, as well as a board member and scientific liaison of the GFPD Foundation. They'll be talking about more of the anatomy of the poster and everything that the do's and don'ts of creating your poster. This recording and slides will be made available, and all the links to our symposium, our summit, and the next 2 webinars will also be linked out in our slide deck. So feel free to join us next month when we go over part 2 of this series. So again, thank you everyone for joining us today.